Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Grid Talk podcast. And today we are going to be previewing the 2026 Japanese Grand Prix. Today, joining me is fellow Grid Talk co-host Owain Medford
Hello.
and co-host of the Grid Stroke podcast. We have Philip Matthew.
Hello.
So let's get cracking. We round three back in Japan again with this kind of earlier time of the year. So it's always a good time to reflect and look back. Of course, last year's Grand Prix was won by Max Verstappen, and in a very surprising result to most, because how did he keep the two McLarens behind? Well, he did it by actually doing a decent race, and McLaren's didn't. But do we all have any fond memories to look back on at Suzuka? It is one that is loved and I think adored by a lot of F1 fans. So, Owain, we'll start with you. What springs to mind when you think of Suzuka?
I mean, when I think of Suzuka, I think it's one of these tracks where, it's a real driver's circuit, but it doesn't have the same sort of characteristics of like a number of other driver's circuits on the calendar. It's in some ways it's more akin to Monaco. There is really only one line around a lot of Suzuka. It's very difficult to get overtakes done. And that for that reason, when I think of sort of amazing performances or outstanding races from Suzuka, you have to hark back to the 2005 Japanese Grand Prix. Particularly Kimi Raikkonen going round the outside of turn one on, I believe it was Fernando Alonso at the time, or it might have been Fisichella. Fernando Alonso, I'm getting the nod. The kind of overtake that we've almost never seen. It's possible to do there, but it's very, very difficult. Obviously, a little bit easier with that era of car, and we've returned to that a little bit with the era of car we have now, with it being a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter. And also, we can't mention the 2005 Japanese Grand Prix without mentioning that overtake by Fernando Alonso on Michael Schumacher at 130R. That was absolutely insane. And I think that's going to actually, that corner in particular is going to present a new challenge. So I think there's a few allegories between the two, just with how Suzuka is. So I think it's important to pay attention to that one as a race. I think it's quite important.
Yeah, it certainly is a good race. In my first year of watching Formula One, that race was to set the tone. But Philip, you're not along to Owain, obviously 2005 great Grand Prix, but any others that spring to your...
For me, I would say, if there's one name that connects the Japanese Grand Prix to Formula One is Senna, good, bad, and different. I always remember 1988 is not watching it. I've just seen the highlights, of course. I wasn't old enough to see it, but messes up the start, has to come back through the field, passes Prost, wins the race in the MP44 to win his first world championship in Japan in a Honda. The celebration, the emotion, stuff happened, of course, those next couple of years, but that is famous. But I always remember that. And then I also remember 96, Damon Hill winning his world championship and the emotion of Murray Walker crying basically on air, not being able to keep it together because of how happy he was for Damon winning that world championship for Williams. Those are two moments. As Owain said, this track is super hard to overtake on. I was literally thinking about it yesterday about how with these new regulations, what's going to happen at some of those corners, like 130R in turn one. It's going to be interesting with the recharging and everything. So those are just some of my memories, but it's an amazing racetrack. Yeah, it tests everything that you have as a driver, and it tests everything in a car. So if you actually have a great race car, then it's a great time. It'll be a great time. If you don't, you're not going to be very happy there this coming weekend at Suzuka.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a tricky Grand Prix this weekend, but I think those both from Owain and you, Phil, great recollections. Obviously, I was not on enough to witness Damon Hill's World Championship, but that line from Murray Walker is like, I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat, is an iconic piece of F1 history, not even just commentary history, just F1 history in general. And I too have a lump in my throat, but I think it might be a cold, so it's not anything to be excited about. So let's look ahead to this weekend. We're going to Suzuka, the new regulations. but a potential for the first wet race. At the moment, it's looking like rain on Saturday and Sunday. It'll be the first chance for us, Owain, to see these new cars in wet conditions. And when it comes to the talk about the way that these hybrid systems work, you would think it would be making the engine recharge a little easier, not being on the throttle as much.
Yeah, it's one of these things. It's harder to regen in wet races, but on the other hand, as you say, you are lifting and coasting more in wet weather. So there's a huge number of considerations that you've got to make. Just to even sort of run the cars in the wet. So we're sort of entering the unknown a little bit, just in terms of sort of both regen, but also the active aero on the wings. There's a change that they have to make where I believe that it's just I think it's either the rear or the front. You still have to keep one of them in the up position, in the high downforce position, rather than having both of them drop or both of them kept up in a wet scenario. That would lead to sort of different downforce scenarios for the teams that they wouldn't necessarily have accounted for on the setup, and that's sort of a consideration that they're going to have to make with just keeping one up. I can't remember if it's the front or the rear. I can't quite find that out. But it's just it's all these little changes that they have to make, and I think when we've got a different recharge limit at this circuit, but it's definitely going to provide a different challenge, and I think we're going to kind of get an interesting set of racing because as the drivers are figuring out the deployment strategy more, it's really going to sort of it's an entirely new circuit that they've got to figure it out on. I don't think it's going to be as bad, and I think the teams are going to, as it has been, and the teams are going to get better at it as well as the drivers, and figuring out how to sort of deploy and regen around this circuit is what is going to separate the teams that are prepared the most and the teams that haven't.
Yeah, obviously, finding out which teams are prepared is a week by week basis at this point, Phil. And going into this potential first wet race of the season is a huge opportunity for those teams who are low in the field to maybe make up a few places. Me and Owain were talking last week in the Chinese review how Cadillac crashing into each other is kind of a wasted potential of opportunity. But for those teams that are kind of lagging around the back, you've got the Aston Martins, the Cadillacs, the Williams, a wet race, a chance for strategy, a chance for maybe a bit of chaos is a huge opportunity for them to score some points very early, potential vital points very early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, especially for those last two teams in Aston, being that their power unit suppliers home race is there, and then of course Cadillac in their first year will, I mean, with a wet race, I mean, with Cadillac with two veteran drivers for sure. I would venture the Williams point is very valid because of how bad it's been for them this start this year. I think they need some momentum before they go into this like forced break. First of 2 month long breaks we're going to have this year now before they have to do all these upgrades and really accelerate the weight drop on the car and all these other things that they have to change. But I would also look at some of these other teams that have performed decently so far through two races. I would look at Alpine. I would look at Haas and the opportunity for them in that loaded midfield battle to go out there and maybe, snag a top five possibly, or, definitely decent haul of points because it's very close at the top, very close amongst that group right now. Only two races in, even after this weekend, only three races of 22. So opportunity is there. And with a wet race, it definitely allows for more, as you said, more opportunities. And so, I mean, I would not just for Williams. I think Williams really needs to emphasize the opportunity here if it gets to be a wet race. But I think for that midfield, that 1 point can be all the difference in a few million pounds. So when it comes down to it at the end of the year.
Yeah, and one team that will be looking to take an opportunity on a new team principal, at least one that's kind of stepping in for team principal this weekend, is Audi, Owain. And the news came out this week that Jonathan Wheatley will be leaving Audi with immediate effect due to personal reasons, is the current line that's being towed at the moment. But why, Owain? Why would you leave such a promising team? Because they haven't had a bad start, Audi.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a change, really. You'd expect, given that he's only been in the role sort of a year and a bit. Audi, which is a new team, new sort of team. Obviously, he's going in at Sauber. Do have to move over to Switzerland, but you can kind of mold the team in your image, which is, that's the sort of natural promotion from someone who was where he was at Red Bull. They're there a long time. Left before Horner left, so therefore wasn't obviously wasn't available for promotion into the team principal role. Lauren Mecky's obviously got that job instead, and went to Audi. So you were kind of expecting this is his new career from this point onwards as a team principal. But what we have is a slightly odd setup, really, for how Audi has chosen to set up have the board work and have the sort of chain of command for the team. So usually you'd have people, the engine department, the chassis department, all of that feeding into the team principal. But that was not the case at Audi. They hired Matti Binotto partially because of his engine guru nature. That's what he did at Ferrari before being team principal. And you go back years. He was basically part of the furniture at that team, and that seems to be his skill set that he prefers. So it's back into maybe something that he's not so comfortable with for Binotto. But unfortunately, what that meant is that for Wheatley, he didn't have full control. He didn't have Binotto reporting into him on the engine side, and I think maybe that might have irked him. This is just pure from the armchair kind of reading into the situation. But if you're wanting to set up a team to win, it's you often want sort of stability of management. Obviously, that's what you want in any business. Let's not forget that these are businesses. And the fact is that you kind of, for a team that has the engine department solely working for Audi, for the former Sauber team, it seems a bit weird that you wouldn't have the engine, the head of the engine development be feeding into the team principal. That's how you sort of pull it all together. Clearly that hasn't happened. Maybe there were some issues with having to live away from home. Obviously, you are moving away from Motorsport Valley, and it's a bit of an easier commute if you live around Silverstone, and that's where your family is. So I think that may have prompted it, but it's a bit of a shame, really, because I was kind of intrigued to see what could be done at Audi. So what this does is it throws wide open the market and kind of throws a spanner in the works at Audi in terms of their stability, which can lead to more negative results. Luckily, like I say, they've got Binotto going in, and he's experienced, if not happy to be team principal, but I'm sure he'll do a great job, or the best that he can do until an alternative is found.
Yeah, so Phil, the seeming destination for Jonathan Wheatley is Aston Martin, what it's looking like. And given their utter disastrous 2026, how do you see that, him teaming up with of course Adrian Newey, long-term colleagues at Red Bull, on a new project, especially one that's going to be completely building from the ground up, given how awful the start of this season's been?
Yeah, I mean, there's nowhere to go but up when it comes to what's going on at Stroll F1. So, I mean, for Wheatley to go back with Newey, I think the familiarity piece is there, being back home and also having access to more staffing and talent. I don't know if that's really going to make much of a difference this year, though, because this whole process has been going on for years now, and that's the thing with Formula One. There really isn't a quick fix. I do believe, at least with the familiarity piece, their Red Bull way, or whatever it is, whatever that way really is, they'll be able to kind of impart some adjustments. I think Newey going back to, the technical piece, the design piece, trying to figure out not just, I mean, they have Andy Cal on the power unit side trying to figure out the issues there. Then you have Newey going and figuring out the design side. So now there's a structure. I think you have a three-pronged structure there that I don't know when it'll bear fruit, but Fernando Alonso, I think, will race until the end of time, seemingly. So maybe by the time, at some point at the end of this career of his, he might actually see something good. But it's going to be hard for them to do anything anytime soon. I think if there's anybody that probably is grateful that there aren't any Grand Prix coming up after the Japanese Grand Prix, I would probably think it would be Aston Martin, and it may be an opportunity for Wheatley to go in there, maybe impart some immediate changes, but we'll see.
Yeah, Phil, I just want to ask you a quick follow-up to that because, of course, you touched on with Aston Martin and, how things might look bright in the future, but given the near future, their home Grand Prix for their engine supplier, Honda, of course, the Japanese fans no longer have the Japanese drivers to support. They'll be turning to Honda as their kind of focal support base. So, do you reckon that they might actually try and take a step this weekend and finish a race, or do you think it's just going to still be far too much with the mess?
They probably wish there was a sprint race this weekend because that's about as far as they're going to finish. I think I know that the Suzuka is a relatively smooth circuit. Most tier one circuits are, but with the vibration issues, with the numerous other issues that come that with that car at the moment, unfortunately, I don't see a finish or an advancement in a Q2 or any type of positive progress this week. I think maybe any hopes of any progression for Aston Martin, I think we have to look at the Miami parking lot in May. That's the earliest we're going to see any type of progression.
Yeah, it's very possible. So, Owain, kind of just circling all the way back now to Audi. So, of course, Matteo Binotto is taking team principal roles. Of course, he has been head of this Audi project for some time. But when it comes to Binotto, he was kind of in charge of Ferrari during, I would say, the biggest memeable era of Ferrari racing, of just utter shambolic strategy, cars that just failed to live up to expectations. Binotto is the face of many a meme in the F1 community. But do you think he can achieve with Audi, with the current setup, what he may not have been able to achieve with Ferrari, given especially the politics that surrounds Ferrari, the intense scrutiny? He's got a brand new project. Sure, he's hit a bit of a bump, but how do you see Audi progressing under Binotto, at least in the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, the question is he going to be there for a couple of years? Is Audi going to, maintain or stick with him as team principal? I think it's a bit, he was unfortunate in a little bit of a way because I think it's important to note that his work in the engine department out at Ferrari, when he was head of the engine department, he was only sort of promoted to that at Ferrari in 2013, and then was only promoted to team principal sort of 2019. Now that sort of, to me, that sort of shows that he was, a real driver in helping create, let's just say, the most powerful engine on the grid at the time. Just before his promotion to team principal. Why that was is obviously well known at this point. But the fact is, he managed to shepherd that engine department up to probably being the best on the grid. And then, both times he sort of inherited a bit of a dog, really, with the with the sort of 2014 engine change and obviously Ferrari being terrible in that first season, and then same with he's unfortunately been the sort of team principal when there's been a period of decline at Ferrari from 2019 to 2022. The only sort of saving grace there really being the early performances that we had in the ground effect era. That's the kind of the best that Ferrari did in that time, apart from a couple of wins here and there. So it doesn't look great, but I think from what I understand of how he's been known in the paddock, he's more quiet, than maybe sort of in temperament, and maybe not being the focus of the kind of scrutiny that you are going to get and do get as a Ferrari team principal. It's almost one of their religions in Italy. So the joke goes that you are permanently in the media for any reason. It's a sense of national pride. It is like the national team, and that takes a certain sort of character to lead. And you don't have that necessarily with Audi. I mean, obviously you're in the limelight because this is a big project. This is Audi's first foray into Grand Prix racing. In the World Championship era. So that brings its own pressure, but it's not quite the same, and it's not with such a storied history as a team like Ferrari. Sauber, for what it's not to be nasty to Sauber, but the peaks have come when it's not been under the Sauber name. It's had to either with BMW or a bit later on. So that there's a bit of pressure there, but ultimately, I think he's probably going to have learned from the experience of being at Ferrari, because that's probably the highest pressure environment you can be in, and Sauber isn't that for various reasons. It's more pressure of not the expectation, but the kind of project that you're on, the prestige of the project. Whereas with Ferrari, it's just permanent all the time. Why aren't you winning, no matter what the circumstances?
Yeah, it's very true. The Italian media are incredibly fickle towards anything Ferrari. So being in that job is, while I imagine amazing as an opportunity in Formula One, is possibly also completely awful in the other way possible. So Phil, let's move on to the front and let's talk about our two main championship contenders this season, George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, both of the Mercedes drivers. It's kind of been a mixed fortune for the two drivers in the two races that we've had so far. They both qualify well generally. I mean, George had a bit of an issue in China. They push to the front, they get overtaken by the Ferraris, and then they kind of split ways from there. Antonelli got a poor start in Australia, and George was kind of being held up by the two Ferraris early in the Chinese Grand Prix. We haven't yet seen the wheel-to-wheel on-track action between the two Mercedes, and now that they both have a win under their belts, do you think Japan is that time where we might start to see a little bit of heat in this championship rivalry? Because it's clear that it's going to be one of these two drivers that are probably going to win it.
I would hope so, for the sake of people, especially here in the US, that have Apple TV, that you're paying for that subscription. But I mean, for George, he's the veteran. He's the one who's had to put in the time and drive in a bad car and all these things. It's lined up to be his championship. Well, Kimi Antonelli went out there last race and showed that there's a reason why Toto put all the weight behind him to go and bring him up as a raw rookie and deal with the accidents and deal with all the mistakes, and even a mistake he made with 5 laps to go in the race in China. But I mean, I brought up Senna and Prost, the famous battles they had there. There's been famous battles amongst other great drivers over there. But I mean, I think they managed that battle. The two of them, they have their rules, not papaya rules, which are obviously outstanding. But in terms of Mercedes, they want to keep it clean. They want to maximize their Constructors' Championship here. They know they're going into a break where they're going to have to focus on whatever that in-between period before the FIA decides to mess with the compression rules. So I would like to believe there will be a battle. I would want to see a battle. I think it would be outstanding. George has shown that both of them have shown they can race wheel to wheel, especially with the Ferraris when they go and pass them at the start of races. But I mean, Kimi is liable to make that error that could end up having both of them go off. I think Russell is more heady in the fact that he's been at it longer. He might be the one that's willing to back out, but he's going to get on the horn and be like, that was not a good move. That was not, that. So that's something we might see. And then especially considering we talked about how narrow this track is, it could get really hairy between those two. And Toto might end up being on the radio if things get a little sideways. But the main thing for them is they want to maximize their points. They want to win the Constructors again. I think that's their focus. and it's a great circuit. So, I mean, I think qualifying is going to be outstanding to watch, and the start is going to be huge, which it has been 2 races or 3 races so far this year.
Yes, I am looking forward to the start. I will be sat at turn two this year, so I'm very much looking forward to hopefully some chaos this year. Away, before we move on to predictions, I want to talk about a driver who was in kind of Antonelli's shoes last year, Oscar Piastri. He was the young buck fighting for the championship, lost out to the championship, and has yet to start a race this year. How many knocks do you think he's going to be able to take to his confidence this season? Because he's just unfortunately not had the best of luck. And if he has another bad result in Japan, it's going to continue to just spiral, especially when you've got another month gap until the next race.
Yeah, it's already pretty bad, really, isn't it? I wouldn't. I think right now it's in the territory of like he's had that one mistake, obviously going to the grid in Australia. That's the biggest blow. What happened in China isn't, as far as we know, it's not related to him or the drivers whatsoever. So, it's kind of, as much as it might throw you off a little bit, just in terms of wondering if your car's going to be reliable or anything like that. This is still up in the air. This is, it's 2 incidents. We can't really draw a trend from this. But as you say, if he, if there is a big mistake from him in Japan, that's a long time to sit and, to have that and sit and fester on it. And I think sports people, they won't tell you this, or maybe they do, but they're incredibly superstitious people. You just going through the weekend, if you just have a little, tap here, a shunt there, just small little things just add up, and you get the feeling, oh, isn't, is it not my year? Is it not my race? Is it not my weekend? And that kind of throws people off. And he's had that for quite a while. At this point, he'd have been sitting there for 3 weeks, kind of wondering, well, I crashed out in, just going to the grid in Australia, and then the car doesn't work. Like, is my championship over in any sort of capacity? You're already on the back foot in terms of, to his teammates. So I think it's one of these things that can sort of weigh on your mind. I think he's strong enough to sort of bounce back from that, because, like I say, it's 2 incidents, only one of which is his fault, and all of the best drivers, even Lewis Hamilton has made mistakes, even in his ridiculously successful seasons over the years. He's made at least one mistake. They all have. It's how you bounce back from it that really shows your character, and I think he's got enough character, does Piastri, to be able to not let this bother him. But yeah, if it's a big issue in Japan, that is a long time to wait, and I think that can start to weigh on people.
Yeah, I mean, he's so far, like, in terms of his actual how much he race, like, laps he's completed so far, has just been the China sprint. He didn't, thankfully make it to the end of the China sprint, but it was behind his teammate, who is now, in terms of on track action, is 2 for 2 against him. So you'll definitely be looking at this race to bounce back and try and get a foothold just in this season, get some points on the board. So we move on to our final section of today, which of course is our predictions. It's not a sprint, so we are just sticking with the regular predictions this week of your pole position, your podium, and then of course your bold prediction. So Phil, we'll start with you. What is your predictions for this weekend's Japanese Grand Prix?
We'll go George Russell, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, and Charles Leclerc as my podium this week. Of course, I would like to say Lewis Hamilton, but I'll take the fact that he got the podium at China and had a really good weekend there. My bold prediction, the pole will be a George as well, and my bold prediction, since we were talking about it earlier, I'll go and say that Carlos Sainz will finish in the top 6. It's definitely
Brilliant.
not going to happen, but I'm a fan of the smooth operator, so I'm sorry. That's where the bias will come out.
Fair enough, Owain. So same to you.
Yeah, so I think for pole, I think Antonelli will get that. But I think in the race, I think it's more likely to be Russell that manages to overcome him and take first place, with Antonelli close behind, and then Hamilton in third place. And then my bold prediction is we haven't really talked about them at all, but it's the other sort of Japanese connection to Formula One that is still there right now, which is Haas. I'm predicting a good sort of second home race, I would call it, for Haas with obviously with the team principal being Komatsu, but also the sort of help, the technical help that Toyota are bringing. I can imagine there being a lot of Toyota top brass there, so they'll be keen to impress. And I think they're going to score points.
I'll be honest, I did completely forget about Haas and the links with Japan this weekend. I was thinking, no, they'll all go in on Honda because of Honda, but yes, how could I do forget that the big TGR logo does sit atop of the car this season? But for me personally, as I'm in a bit of a battle with Owain, so I am key to maybe go a little bit contrarian in order to go get some points on the board. But pole position, I'm going to put George Russell. I think just over a one lap, he is just that bit better than Antonelli in these cars. For the race, I'm going to go with Kimi Antonelli, and then I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton second and Charles Leclerc third. I'm predicting some kind of issue for George Russell. Maybe gets caught up on the line, something happens with his car. Then bold prediction. I feel like there's too much low-hanging fruit for bold predictions this season, especially when it comes to Aston Martin. But I'm going to say that both RBs qualify and finish ahead of both Red Bulls in this weekend. That's going to be my bold prediction. I think Lawson is finally finding his feet, and I think Lindblad will be keen to kick back after what was quite a disappointing Chinese Grand Prix last weekend. Okay, so that is all from us today. I will now open the floor to my two guests joining me today to plug whichever thing they fancy. So, Wayne, let's start with you.
Yeah, so you've heard our predictions, but if you want to hear the rest of see the rest of the predictions for the Grid Talk hosts, then you better check out the Grid Talk Prediction Challenge, which has all of these predictions and a couple more available for each of our hosts. We run that every week for each race weekend, and it's a championship. It's a real battle, as Louis mentioned. I think there's a few of us on 8 points. There was a big haul of 5 points. A number of people getting 5 points in different ways last weekend in China. But that's making it hot up, and this is the moment to try and not lose any points. This is the where it really stacks up. And if you want to see that, you have to go and see it on our Grid Talk social channels. That's available at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the @, and you can see exactly how we stack up, exactly how wrong other people are, and I'm right, obviously. Because I'm going to win this year. Abysmally last year, but I'm going to win this year. That's at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the @ to see that.
Yes, I did have to watch Owain. I believe I'll go above me in the championship after last week, which is a bit of a shame. But Phil, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me and my former Grid Talk contributor, Josh, my good friend, on the Grip Strip podcast. It's all on all podcast platforms. You can find it on YouTube, Grip Strip Podcast, with our videos for all our episodes. You can also find the audio at GSP 1428. You can find it at philipgmatthew.com and podbean.com. And of course, also, I do work with George on Motorsports Reports. So I'm doing articles or videos on different racing, not just Formula One, but we're doing more NASCAR, IndyCar related. So you can find me there on Motorsports Reports on YouTube. And also, if you're on Microsoft, you can see it over there and other places where it appears. And thanks for hosting, Louis, and being in the midst of the two Owains again. It's nice to bring it back old school, so it was nice.
So Grid Talk is available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search for the Formula One Grid Talk podcast for a huge back catalogue of shows. God knows how many we've done now. A huge thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for the support on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign to our Patreon for exclusive content? You get early releases of the episodes as well as bonus episodes. Also, make sure you subscribe here on YouTube to know when each new weekly episode is released, and we'll be back soon with our review of the Japanese Grand Prix. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast. Goodbye.